pledge allegiance, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Chairman, may I speak to the director of the Pledge of Allegiance for a second? Sure. If everybody, this is a common mistake. There's no comma before under God.
Right.
You just go straight to one nation under God, not one nation under God.
I understand, Rotarians understand that, but the other 350 million people.
Right, well, one person at a time.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Roll call.
Richard Fridena. Brad Nelson.
Grady, Rhodes.
Levoy, Hurley.
Herbert, Tellman.
John, Cote.
John Voorhees.
Brian Bickel, and I believe we have a quorum.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Call the public. Don't see any public. So, discussion of the idea of the chairman's report. I don't believe it was the chairman's report. I believe it was the chairman's fully pulpit. I think you mentioned that Karen had wanted it on there, so have an opportunity to clean up stuff.
Yeah, it was mostly for updating things. It didn't have to be agenda items.
If there's something on the agenda, or it's something that needs to be followed up on, I think it should be an agenda item, not just an open forum for the chairman. I personally don't think it needs to be on there.
I don't know.
I don't care one way or the other.
So, barring any objection from anybody else, just take it off the agenda for future agendas. Procedures manual, Barbara.
I sent in 4 pages of comments on the procedures manual, and contrary to last time, I actually got a response that they received my comments. Whether they read them is another question, but I had comments in, say 4 categories. One is lack of definitions. I thought we needed a section defining things, and I indicated some terms that I thought needed definition. The word independent, for example, is used in a couple of different ways in the document.
It references a non-existent political party.
Yeah. So anyhow, that was one. A second general category was areas where I thought that they could indicate that counties were enabled to do things beyond the basic law, such as do a logic and accuracy test for local elections. And that is not required in the law, but it is not prohibited, and the opinion that we had from the Attorney General was that it should be encouraged. So there are several categories like that, things that Pima County does that other counties don't do, that make the elections safer, and just thought they ought to be added as options.
Encouraged but not mandated.
Yeah, or just made it aware that you can do this if you want to, basically. Some of those were had some comments on voter registration, verification of signatures, and again, this was in the category of standardizing procedures. That Pima County, I believe, has more stricter procedures, and I thought that it ought to be standardized, that every county ought to have a basic training, which is not in the manual. So some things like that. So that's basically the kinds of suggestions that I made.
Any other comments on the procedures meeting?
If individuals have not done so, you can go there and see individual citizens' comments as well. I haven't seen yours yet, Barb, but Benny's got copious amounts. So
You wrote a book. Multi-volume book, right?
And I believe it goes to the Attorney General the 1st of October.
that is the mandatory date. It has to be in the Attorney General's and the Governor's hands by October 1.
Right.
How soon they may act on it and whether they may send some things back for additional review, but they will meet the deadline by getting it to those individuals by October.
And I'm assuming that, again, if the Attorney General and or the Governor refuse to approve it, we stick with the 2014 version
I think that's a reasonable assumption, that until something new comes along, you stick with the old.
It has the old calendar for what you do in the year 2015.
True.
Any other comments on the procedures meeting? Okay, precinct changes, Brad.
Very minor, I'm sorry, I was a little bit of a rush. I was hoping to bring a map of a change because there is only one. It pertains to Supervisor District 3. It's up in the area south of the municipality of Marana. For those who may be familiar with the area, you know, the Sunflower, it's even north of that area as well. But it is at the intersection of Twin Peaks Road and Quarry Road. Quarry Road is a diagonal road that cuts across in that area. In 2018, the boundaries between Precinct 6 and Precinct 115 were established. We needed to move those because some previously undeveloped land now has a housing area going in, and in fact, people are already residing there, and there was the chance that indeed a precinct line could split a house in two. And so we moved the line. So we have moved the line. That is the only thing that we have moved. The Board of Supervisors took action on that particular matter at their Tuesday meeting last, and that is the only change going forward. I've communicated that to the recorder as well, so she knows that there's that only one line change to go forward for 2020. Those new lines have to be in effect, if my memory serves me correctly, by January 2.
So we're not merging or dividing any precincts anymore.
Certainly there have been growth in precincts, but individuals predominantly have been deciding to place themselves on the permanent early voting list, and therefore there is no need to accommodate additional, a large volume of additional voters at the polls so the precincts can stay as they are. And by the way, polling places weren't established just yet. That will be at a later date, and that will be brought before this board as well as the individual parties so that they may comment on it as they wish.
And for my edification, more than anything else, there is no requirement below the state legislative level for population parity in any political district.
That is absolutely correct.
For those of us who are still reasonably new, Brad, could you, at
You're
some,
not reasonably new.
Not
Yeah,
me.
you did. Excuse.
I think that was old. About 10 years around. I'm still.
I gotta hurry up. It's like a shirt I saw on a World War II veteran the other day. Turns out he was 98. It said, I didn't realize getting old would take so long. Could you brief us on how the precincts are established and the current precincts and how they're in the county and how what their populations are and makeups and that sort of thing? Kind of give us a.
One of the
quick
things
tour.
pardon me.
That's all right.
I trampled over your words, so I'm going to be specific. At any rate, there is no statutory reference as to say once a area gets to have so many, you've got to make another precinct. That is true in other states of the union, but not here within the state of Arizona. So the way that individual election precinct lines are, as Brian referred to, first thing you have to know is where the congressional district lines are. Next thing you have to know is where the state legislative district lines are, because an election precinct, that very small unit,
Right.
cannot be split by any of those
It's got to fit in
jurisdictional
on
lines.
the boundaries, I understand.
Once those are done, and they are never really done because they're always in court for one reason or another, but once they are established and seem to be blessed, absent of any court action, then you can start building the Board of Supervisors districts. Board of Supervisor districts, again, have to adhere to those congressional lines and things like that, as well as justice of the peace precincts. School districts, municipal boundaries, fire district boundaries, things of that nature are of no consequence. So once you have, as you begin through these layers, then you get down to an area where you try and come up with a easily identifiable geographic area. You know, across the railroad tracks here and down this road and across the river wash here and then back up a power line, that seems to work. And then what we like to do is keep it manageable so that even in our most popular elections, we're probably only going to get about an 80% turnout. So in that geographic area, if we've got 1,000 registered voters, 80% of those are going to going to vote 800. But 80% of those are going to vote via the mail,
Okay.
or at least through the early voting process. What remains is the number of people that you can anticipate coming in a very high turnout to a polling place. And that's kind of the mechanics that we use as we go forward.
So, you, in your conversation now, you have to help me because I don't understand. So these are genuine questions. Who is we when you're establishing these boundaries? And I assume they go to the Board of Supervisors for approval.
Exactly.
But who is we that is putting the line here, doing these admirable statistical analysis of the people there? Is that a commission?
No, that's basically my office along with the recorder's office, working off of data we have from the recorder's office mentioning the number of registered voters in this geographic area.
And so we have a big election coming up in 2020. And we have one going on now, of course, but it's, so how often do these precincts then get adjusted and redrawn, so to speak?
The law says for all counties in the state of Arizona, the individual boards of supervisors must establish, and here's what it says, a convenient number of election precincts by October 1, previous to a year in which a general election is held. So that's why the Board of Supervisors just did it a couple of days ago.
Okay, so is this action that the board took a couple of days ago the only action that will be taken between now and 2020, or do you anticipate reevaluating that?
Unless there is just some massive increase in population that brings about a massive increase in the number of registered voters, I don't see anything that's going to change that. Now, you can perceive the law, I should say interpret the law to say, once they do that auction on October 1st, you are prohibited from making any changes, okay? There have been some instances in the past, predominantly in Maricopa County, if you're familiar with the New River area, is north of the Phoenix area. It's an area also known as Anthem up there. Anthem exploded in population.
I know.
And there was absolutely no churches or clubs or anything of that nature in which to have a polling place in. So they had a polling place with over, I should say, this was even before Pelley. They had a voter registration of over 10,000 just for that area. They were voting until 2 o'clock in the morning up in that particular area. Now, what they could have done, had they had the facility to move it, they could have basically made that into precinct 1.1 and 1.2 and actually split them up differently. That's called an administrative split. You're not adding an additional precinct, you're just sectioning off one that's already been established. So that's our fail-safe if we need to do that.
Well, that's an interesting idea. I am very much familiar with Anthem. There's other areas in Maricopa County that had the same kind of thing on the west side, for instance. But what concerned me in your conversation earlier, the only concern, minor, is that we didn't cut a house in half, so we moved it up around that house. But we've got a divided neighborhood. How big is that neighborhood? I wonder.
Oh, depending on how you define neighborhoods, you and I can live across the street from each other, and you're a completely different precinct.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's true
Everywhere.
So if I may, I'd like for you to come back and go through that whole thing and with what we have now with precincts and how to balance
John,
that.
hold that for future agenda.
Yeah, I'm not going to do it for another 2 years, so let's see if we're all still here in 2 years.
Okay,
Can you
anything
brief
else
us
on
on this?
precinct changes?
If I were to request, could you brief us on the status of the existing precincts as to population?
Can you put that,
I can-
bring that up during future agenda items?
Yes. Got it.
Anything else on precinct 2? City of Tucson election, Barbara.
Richard and I spent many hours down in the city observing. I would like Richard to come in first since he's new, he's not done this before. What did you see? What were your impressions?
Well, I didn't see the place where they were collecting the ballots. I never got over to, what's it, 12th Avenue they call it.
Have you
I did, yeah. I never got over there to see their procedures, but the procedures at the city, I found really reinforcing my sense that ballots are really respected and cared for. The fact that nothing could start until there were the political observers, that there was a security guard that maintained an observation of the ballots, and as they were moved, and anybody that came in contact with it, the room was really secure in terms of cameras. The counting machines seemed to work well. They were not connected to the wall except for their electrical plugs, so there was no internet connection with it. I found that really good. The staff acted professionally. There was minimal contact between the observers and the workers, although if there was something that looked out of the ordinary, the city clerk, Mr. Randolph would come over and explain what the glitch was. He also did that with every ballot that was kicked out in terms of overcounts.
Overcounts or overvotes?
Overvotes. Sorry, I keep confusing that. And I thought that was really good because he would show it to the political observers first, explain what the problem with the ballot was, then go to the judges and give it to the judges, and they then decided whether this was in fact just a stray mark on the ballot or what the intention of the voter was, and then if it was deemed to be an actual vote, then they would create a new ballot. So I was pretty impressed with the smoothness of which it operated, the professionalism of the staff, the security that was taken, and the care as I've gone about and explained to people I interact with about the security measures. Everybody was relatively surprised that there's actually a vault in the city hall where ballots are stored and they're signed in and out. So it's a very educational process. I would encourage anybody and all of us to go watch and count because it's really quite a process.
Karen Schutte was there for the Republicans, and Elaine Lim and I divided up the duty for the Democrats. One observation I had, that there were more glitches than I would have expected. Nothing that was major or affected the count or anything of that sort. But for example, they had to start again twice. They counted several groups of ballots, and they found they made a mistake, so they had to erase everything and go back to the beginning twice, which I've never seen happen at the county level.
At least that we've heard about, right?
Trust me, she's been there every
Yeah.
time.
And it turned out they couldn't just back out that one precinct where they had a problem. They had to go all the way back to zero and start over again. And I'm not sure that was true, but they did consult with the ESNS. And then I noticed more inexperienced scanner operators, and part of that was involved with they're just hiring their own staff who ordinarily work in the clerk's department doing something else. So, and then the third thing that we all noticed was the problem with some early ballots going out to the wrong people, wrong address. And that, again, I think was inexperience. That they didn't use the procedure that FAN uses to catch the people who registered changed at the last minute. So I think that, still think the county is the best around, but none of the problems were really affected the election, the results of the election at all. And they were very professional. So, and they do their duplication right in the same room as the scanners, so that we actually sit there. And then they do their logic and accuracy test after the count is finished. And Karen and I participated in that, but it was primarily staff. So what's the difference?
I have a question. How many days did they do the counting and the ballot
They
indication?
started election, and then they skipped a couple of days. And then they skipped the Wednesday after the election, and then they finished up a little bit on Friday, and went on Thursday.
Okay.
Relatively small turnout.
Did they do a hand count on
Yeah,
it?
that's why I said that Elaine and I, and Karen and I actually helped count,
Okay.
but it was primarily the staff. And they don't have any law that says what percentage of the ballots they can count. And they had been doing 10%. And Karen and I thought that was unnecessarily high, so it went down, I think, about 5%.
Anything else on the city elections? Brad, can you explain the process that we're going to go through to determine whether we have odd-year elections again? As it relates to the city elections? Or is that something that's going to happen off the November election?
That's something that's gonna happen off the November election, is the way I understand it.
Then I'll take my own advice and say that. for
Yeah, it's a
future
comparison
items.
of the turnout versus the.
Yeah, it's
It's
a
complicated.
convolution.
Yeah.
Okay. Presidential preference election, Brad.
As I think Mr. Dale sent out the notice that the Republican Party have decided to opt out. The Secretary of State informed me about 48 hours ago that the Libertarian and Green Party will also not participate in the coming presidential preference election either. The next item that will be before the boards of supervisors pertaining to that election for Pima County will be the necessary consolidation of precincts. All jurisdictions across the state of Arizona, depending upon the size of their registered voters, have to reduce the number of general election polling places by a certain number. Maricopa County and Pima County, because of the number of registered voters we have to take our number of general election precincts, which is here in Pima County is 249 precincts, and cut that at least in half. And so that is what we had in 2016. It's what we are proposing to have, subject to board review and action, 124 polling places. They will likely be the very same polling places and very same consolidations that we had for the 2016 presidential preference election, with perhaps the understanding that Elks Club that we used 4 years ago is no longer available or something of that nature. Again, for those folks around the table that may not be aware of it, it is a closed election. You have to be a member of the political party that is participating in that election in order to cast the ballot.
I had heard a rumor that there was a possibility that if the Republicans opted out, it was going to be a mail-only election. Is there any?
I have not heard that rumor, but already existing within the law is that if you have a precinct or a precinct consolidation that has less than 300 registered voters available, I should say eligible to vote in the election, you can make that an all-mail ballot election precinct. We will have some of those out in some of the more rural areas. We are, as a state, restricted from making that all-mail ballot election designation from having not take place on Indian land. So any of the native reservations, such as we have here, even though Precinct X out in Santa Rosa District out in the on the reservation may have less than 300 registered voters, we are prohibited from making that all-mail. So, but I have not heard, I've heard the desire from various jurisdictions across the United States to just across the state to make it an all-mail ballot election forever and forever go forward. But it's not, that's unlikely to go anywhere.
So that consolidation that just applies to the preference.
That's correct. Well, in the past, the state legislature, when they requested special elections in 2016, May of 2016, there was the Prop 123 election pertaining to education. The legislature said, run it as if you're running a PPE, so we had to consolidate during that election. But usually, it's a course all into itself.
Okay. Anything else on the PPE? So it is a
is a Democratic Party only election.
So, was there a charge to the parties for doing that, or is that?
I would like to. That's getting into our next subject matter, but, so within the statutes, that hasn't been changed since the PPE came along.
If that's,
Okay,
let's just move to the next agenda, and the cost of special elections.
Okay.
That way we're adhering to.
now, Arnie was the one who actually broached this subject, and I think he had in the back of his mind that we might need to have a special election for the U.S. senatorial race that, or I should say seat that Ms. McSally is currently chairing. I can tell you that the only thing that we've had that's countywide in nature, that is a special election, was the Prop 123 that we mentioned previously. That cost the elections department, not the recorders, but just the elections department, about $750,000, of which we were reimbursed completely by the state of Arizona. The other special election that ladies and gentlemen around this table might remember was, of course, the congressional vacancy election that we had when Gabrielle Giffords resigned. We came up on the short end of the stick on those particular election reimbursements. Off the top of my head, and I can look out of my phone to get more exact numbers, but for the, at that time, congressional vacancy election certainly wasn't countywide. For the primary was about $500,000, we got about half that, and for the general was about $500,000, and we got about half the reimbursements there. The presidential preference election, within statutes, it says that counties will receive $1.25 for every active registered voter. So, so the legislature in the past has said that's what the law says, that's all you're going to get. It may cost you $5 per registered voter to run the election, but we're only going to give you about $25 for Secretary of States through the years, such as Secretary Reagan, Secretary Bennett, and so on, who have budgeted different amounts of money. We have, from time to time, been 100% reimbursed for the presidential preference election, but usually we have not been. I have asked Secretary Hobbs's office whether its counties, not just Pima, might expect to be fully reimbursed for the presidential preference election, and all she can say is that is her intention at this particular point in time. But how the legislature might approve reimbursement is still up in the air.
So who would be doing the reimbursement, if I may ask?
The state of Arizona.
So somewhere in the giant budget of the state, there are funds set aside to reimburse the counties for these kinds of things.
Correct. Right. The Arizona Secretary of State has to budget the necessary fund or request the necessary funds in the budget. Now, whether that gets approved or not.
And so is each, help me here, because there is a lack of my knowledge on my part. How then do they say $1.25 per individual vote or whatever? Where does that get set?
That's within statute. When the presidential preference election law passed in, I think, 1996, that was the amount that was in statute, and it hasn't changed since then.
Is that a federal?
No, that's state law.
That's the state. So our guys up there have been sitting around doing their thing, but they haven't paid attention to business as to the cost of these things.
The cost of the elections, again, in 1996, when that law passed, the Republican Party was the only party that was going to participate, because at that time, the DNC said nobody can have any type of caucus or convention prior to a certain date. And so it was, basically it was, well, given the calendars and the actions by the individual parties at this time, it's just going to be $1.25. Later on, the Democratic Party decided, nope, we want to play in the presidential preference or presidential primary along, and it hasn't been touched since then. Nor was there any consideration, although it's not large numbers, of libertarians or Greens entering the
So
process.
if we were in Wayne's World and we had everything going correctly, what would you recommend needs to be done at the state level to line these guys up and so that we have a system that covers the cost actually of doing this, as opposed to laying it on the local taxpayers to absorb it through shortages?
My personal opinion make the parties have a caucus individually and have the parties take care of it.
Okay, so that's one thought, but if the present system continues,
We have been in the hole, we meaning counties, for at least 10 years now. So
So what's it cost? What's it cost?
so I've got five,
What's the per voter cost? It's not a bucket.
It's actually the cost,
it's probably closer, again, from 2016 here in Pima County, it's probably closer to $4 a registered voter.
is there a historical tracking of that? So that if we wanted to go talk to somebody, we know what we're talking about here.
All counties have to send in their itemized bill. Here's how much we spent on personnel. Here's how much we spent on printing. Here's how much we spent on postage. Here's how much we spent on polling place rental. All the logistics involved. PSA announcements. We itemize that all out, send that to the Secretary of State and say, please reimburse us for this amount of money. They then try as best they can to meet that particular invoice. But to get to your question, it's not just Pima County that does that, all of the counties do. So you can go down to the minutia of what they're asking to be reimbursed for.
So the question that from Mr. Bickel here is that a full discussion of how that gets handled and what we think as a commission, we should say the Board of Supervisors needs to be said for statutes to take care of this or to more reasonably reimburse us for this. Would that be another appropriate item on an agenda, the historic, this is what happened in 2014, this is what happened in 2016, this is what happened in so on and so forth. Is there?
We have been knocking on that door since 2000, when the next presidential preference election came around after 1996. So adding to the conversation isn't going to hurt anything, but I don't think it's going to change anything.
So right now, we rely on the Secretary of State to properly anticipate the costs and get it approved by the state. Basically, that's what we're doing.
Right? And Secretary Hobbs put in her budget the necessary funds to pay for a presidential preference election that would have included all of the major political parties. The legislature came back during the budgetary process and said the likelihood of the Republicans playing is nil. So we are only going to approve a budget for half of what you asked for. If indeed the Republicans do decide to play, come back and ask for more money. That's basically what happened.
If you'd like to see it more fervently discussed, again, bring it up during future agenda items.
Yeah, that's why I'm sitting here being quiet, is I think we really need to kind of dig into this. It's an important practical part of governing and integrity. If we don't, what desire do we have to do this correctly, really, if we're going to get whacked in the knees because we're going to get reimbursed for it. So I think that's a very appropriate item, Brad, and it's going to fall on your shoulders, unfortunately.
I can give you the itemizations of all of our invoices, and you guys can cuss and discuss what that means.
Can you provide that prior to the next meeting electronically?
That's right.
Ahead of time?
Okay.
So that if the discussion occurs, there's a little bit of basis in knowledge rather than trying to figure out what's going on during the course of the day.
I'll certainly be able to provide everything for Pima County, whether I'm going to be able to do it.
I'm not worried about anything else.
Just Pima County is what I would be interested in.
Yep, I can do that.
And I'd like to see some kind of a historical trend thing, so that we know, well, this is the way it's been going. There's nothing.
But basically, you have to have the $1.25 taken out of the statutes and replaced with something.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's a bad letter.
You probably did get that for inflation, probably too.
Correct. Yeah, something needs to be there to realize that things that cost $1.25 in 1996 don't cost that today.
The Big Mac cost about that back then.
Well, and that's an important part of all this, is to understand, well, how do we grind on people to get this corrected? Because I can't tell you how many times I've met with people and they said, well, gee, it's refreshing to hear somebody talk classic case, we're managing something we know nothing about.
Okay, anything else on special election costs? Levoy?
So I apologize, I didn't get Mr. Daly time. We're going to defer this because we spent so much time on the item 12. We did not get that one.
It's been a while.
So that's what we deferred. Sorry about that.
Table, I believe, is the appropriate. So you're making a motion to table item number 10 again.
Yes.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Any objections? Hearing none, it's tabled until time certain, next meeting.
Okay, well, like I say, a lot of work we're going to talk, we've done, and the other one will flow into this, so it's been a lot. Okay.
E.I. Isaac and Mr. Pothier has not arrived.
Motion to table.
Second.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? Any
I presume we'll
objections?
put this on the next agenda.
Any objections? Hearing none. The Isaac discussion has also been tabled. Item number 12, PC election procedures reviewed by the Republican members of the TCEIC.
So back about early this year, maybe after the elections and the holidays and stuff, a couple of us, like John, myself, and Bill Beard, who was still here before Grady got here, started talking about elections and decided to put all of our thoughts on paper, basically. And it evolved, first of all, not as 3 members of the Elections Integrity Commission, but as 3 private citizens. We have to be on the Elections Integrity Commission. We try to make that very clear throughout the process. So it evolved into laying out the number of items. I think everybody's got copies of laying out of things that we saw. And a lot of things we've talked about here in the meetings over the last several months. Okay, so there shouldn't be anything in there that if you read it, that's a real surprise. Okay. We've taken this to a number of folks on our side. We've talked to some of the Republican legislators like Fincham and Leach, and I think there's somebody else down there talking to us. Just those 2 right now?
Well, those 2 and the other gentleman that's up in 10.
Yeah. So we've talked to those, obviously. Our party chair has been involved with reviewing it. You know, there was a meeting.
The commissioners, I mean the supervisors.
We've individually briefed our supervisors on what we've been doing, simply because they're part of the process. And then we've also briefed, and then I think it was back in, that was back in, a couple months ago. 3 months ago.
Almost 6 weeks ago. Anyway.
Yeah, back in July. We also briefed Mr. Huckleberry and had a nice discussion with Chuck on this kind of thing. And one of the things that came out of that meeting was he said, hey, give me some recommendations and we'll look at them. Because we didn't know that there's a legislative calendar that the board goes through. They put things together and then they send stuff off to the legislative representatives and say, hey, here's some things you'd like to have a look at, like reimbursing costs for elections kind of thing. So we were not familiar with that, so we've worked on that. So we talked to Chuck. He looked at it. And I was impressed by Chuck. One thing, he'd actually read the document before he got the meeting. And he does his work. He does. He did. He was familiar with it.
And so had Brad.
And I'm sorry, Brad. I'm sorry. Yes, we met with Brad too. I'm sorry, Bella. I go through my memory here more or less. We met with Brad. He read it. But, and Chuck reminded us and said, "Hey, give us some stuff and we'll take a look at it." So to that end, we've been working on it. He asked us. He said, "Hey, this looks pretty good. Do you mind if I distribute it?" So he did ask permission. So he sent it out to the staff there. I don't know if he sent it out to any of you guys or not. Doesn't matter. But that's when we decided to make sure you got it. We sent out copies to everybody here on the commission, so you have copies to review and put on the agenda. So to that end, we've also, in the meantime, worked on a more succinct summary
basically 2 pages, but a summary addendum to this document that has not been distributed because we just finished it like last night. maybe today we got a couple days to look at it. So the point here is that I'm just trying to keep you informed of what we are as individuals are doing in the election process. Now, what the commission wants to do as far as looking at it, and if there's anything that you guys agree on, that we talk about, they make supporting recommendations, that's all well and good. If you don't, that's fine too. What my point here today is really just to kind of lay that background out, entertain any questions about the process, whatever. I miss anything, John? Grady?
No, if there's questions, we're here to try and explain what we've done. We're not trying to hide anything. We were trying to do something that we thought was public service. This was not written. These documents have gone to great pains to try to make them sound like they were, our thoughts were even-handed without any axe to grind. The recorder was very receptive. She has just, I think, we maybe skipped over this, but she distributed it to some of her folks as well. So we're hoping that a system that was designed in 1900, when the world was smaller and different, staffed and populated by people who were different, can be maybe brought up to speed a little bit. We've done our best, but we're not 1900 anymore. We're not even 1948. We're not even 1968. We have 80% of our documents, votes in this county last time were by mail. There are advances in things that we should think about, talk about. I know that I've tried to talk about them prior here. And so we look forward to going forward and seeing what, if anything, we can accomplish. That in a positive manner as opposed to the very divisive manner we have going on in the country otherwise. We still have to get to the point where people believe in the elections. That means the elections have to be conducted with some magic word, integrity. The one thing that maybe we could amplify in here, that just by the speech that we haven't, that Levoy did not speak to, but is in there, is we're thinking that this model that Pima County has for a Pima County Election Integrity Commission should have participation by the recorder, and that for larger counties in particular, for all counties, this should be something that gets put in place so that the local folks are having some oversee of what goes on. And we think on a state basis that Pima County is, in the manner in which it handles its ballots and processing, is ahead of the curve. We didn't have the confusion they had in Phoenix. I applaud the system and the people who ran it for doing that. The recorder was very proud of the fact that when we met with her, that she had been told that this was a model for Phoenix to look at. We think that's true with adjustments. And so we're open to questions.
Barbara?
I have 2 questions. The first is a request from Arnie. He wanted this question asked. Why did you choose to circumvent the commission and go directly to the recorder and the board of supervisors?
I think I can answer that. As Brian in a previous few meetings back mentioned, that trying to accomplish anything as a committee is pretty difficult. I think we were trying to write a letter to Secretary of State, and we were indicating that having another month go by after making edits would just be too long. So by committee, especially a committee that meets once a month, something like that is unworkable. Just 3 or 4 people that were working on this, as a group, it was challenging to get everybody's input and get it all worked out. So it's really a issue of.
This is not a monolithic group, and that needs to be understood.
And, by the way, John, I think it was July, meeting, talked about our findings and our requests. So it's not like we were completely kept out of the loop.
I think part of John's feeling was that although you identified yourself as representing the Republican Party, it could have been interpreted as a subcommittee of the commission, since you identified yourself as commission members.
I don't think we ended up in January.
We've never said that we were doing this as a part of the, in fact, those have been always our opening words to the political types that we've met with. We don't have, this was done as a Republican Party thing. It started as a Republican Party thing. The reason that Bill Beard and myself and Levoy were initially involved only were because we were the persons who knew about the election. We spoke to Karen Schutte. We spoke to Benny White. Benny White had early versions of this document. It was all, I want to use a Navy term, all hands on deck, so to speak, with numerous meetings with within our party of legislative district chairman and advisors and so on, bumpty bump, in which we went through this. It was a Republican effort. It was not a Pima County Elections Integrity Commission effort. We happened to have seats on the commission. And I think that ad infinitum, I have tried to go over what we were finding 2 or 3 times, not just last July. And I was specifically told that didn't want to hear any more about the recorder and so on and so forth. So that's more of this I don't think more of this could have been disclosed ahead of time. I don't think it's possible to disclose more of this ahead of time and gotten to the point where we had a written document that everybody would agree to. Just very difficult.
My other question was, where did you get the idea that we're still doing things like we did in 1900 when they counted ballots by hand in the polling place?
Well, I came about it as a citizen and observing this, that these are ideas and the way the government was set up, the way things were established. That's about the time when we have a constitution in Arizona. Rhode Island having the very first state constitution, Arizona having one of the last, and it's considered more modern by its nature. And so there were notions put into this that were good and they were well thought out. Well, we've evolved a little bit, and the country's evolved a little bit, and this isn't 1900 where we have a bunch of precincts. This isn't 1945 where we have a bunch of precincts, more precincts maybe than we have now. And you go in, you say, "Hi, Joe, how are you?" And everybody's shaking each other's hand and they know each other.
If you're missing the point.
I guess, something like that.
Yeah, we have changed enormously 1912 Constitution, changed enormously. We had lever-type voting machines, we had hanging shad-type voting machines. We have made enormous changes. We've changed the registration requirements. And to say that we're still back over a century ago is just mistaken.
Well, that's, of course, your opinion, and I'm not talking about the mechanics of things. I'm talking about the thought process of things and how they're managed. And we have made an enormous stride by, in this county, and maybe in Phoenix as well, although they're kind of dragging their feet, of having an elections director who is skilled in pulling the elections material together. I don't disagree about that. And it helps divide up some of the responsibilities. But we still have 1900 thinking in our responsibilities.
That's where I disagree with you, but let's try it there.
But one thing I think we all have talked about, we all agree, I think, is that today's elections have changed dramatically from when the current statutes were written back pre-mail-in voting. Okay, so they really don't. It's a hodgepodge of stuff that's patched to get to where we are today. They don't accommodate some of the technology. We talked about that in this commission. So there are issues with our laws being out of date.
No question about that. I'm just questioning his blanket statement, we're still in 1900. Okay, let's go on.
Any other comments? I have some. And when I got the memo, I went through pissed off, disappointed, particularly after your righteous indignation at my comment in my letter to the Secretary of State. My disappointment was with you gentlemen initially. If the statements you've made this morning are correct, my disappointment is with Chuck. A document that was presented to the Board of Supervisors with the perception, and it's a word everybody in here likes, is the perception is that we have integrity in our elections, and that may not be the case, but the perception in the cover memo from Mr. Huckleberry that this came from the Elections Integrity Commission with approval by the chair of the Republican Party of Pima County, to me is inappropriate at best and downright disappointing at the worst. You know, it was, I have no problem with you guys doing what you did.
Yeah.
I have no problem that you went to Chuck Huckleberry. But as soon as that memo came out from Chuck that said, for Republican members of the Election Integrity Commission, somebody in your group should have gone back and said, wait a minute, retract your memo. This has absolutely nothing to do with the Election Integrity Commission. You formed a group. I never received an email, a phone call, a text, or a request from anybody in that group that said, hey, we're going to put together this little deal and maybe it's going to be referred to as a product of this commission. That memo from Chuck Huckleberry, in my opinion, is misleading.
We have no control of Chuck.
I understand that, and that's why I said.
To your point, point well taken, that we probably should have said, hey, because I read it, I didn't read it that way. I'm sorry, that didn't, so it just didn't read it.
catch it either.
We didn't catch it, we're pretty good at catching stuff. We made it clear to Chuck, and we have made it to everybody, and we, on our opening statements, this was a Republican Party effort by 4 people, 1 former member of the EIC. So we made that as clear as we could to everybody we talked to.
The meeting was asked for by the Pima County GOP chair, so it was clearly a GOP effort.
And I understand that, and so you guys know ahead of time, I will draft a letter under my signature to Chuck and the members of the Board of Supervisors indicating that this was not in any way, shape, or form a product of the Election Integrity Commission. It was a Republican Party effort, it was a Republican, which should have been obvious to Chuck.
We told him, we've made it clear.
Jeff?
I will add the same thing I've said before. Each and everything that you guys bring up amounts to an attempt at voter suppression. All you care about, you can't win elections in this county or this city. All you care about is somehow speeding up the results so that in a manner in which you deprive people of the opportunity to vote. And that's what it's all about. And you can couch it in all these other terms you do, but that's what it is. And I've said this before. And that's what you guys are up to, and we're on to your game.
Are you done?
Yeah.
Just a minute.
I
Just a minute. Richard.
Well, I wrote a letter to the Board of Supervisors and everybody that was CC'd on Huckleberry's list about the fact that I saw this is entirely differently than you did. I saw it as an example to undermine confidence in voters' abilities to come forward I agree with you that there are a lot of problems on the national, the state, the county, and the city level, but I call them irregularities rather than problems. And I disagreed with your underlying premise that the system is overwhelmed. What I experienced in sitting through the election process is that it's not overwhelmed, it's just an intense process that takes time. And I found that I agree with you that it's voter suppression. I ran it through the Green Party, so I made it as a commissioner for the Green Party that I sent, and I didn't think I needed to distribute it to the group since this wasn't a group effort, but it was something that was presented. Because I was disturbed that Huckleberry says in the second sentence, 2 of the members of the current Election Integrity Commission, 2 of the members are current members of the Election Integrity Commission, and 1 is a former member. That clearly said that it was acting in my party's name, and whether that was the perception you meant to create or not, that was the one that was left.
May I respond?
Levoy first.
Go ahead, John.
I want Levoy not to respond in anger. We expected some of this. To you, Mr. Rogers, I have one word: baloney. You're playing your typical card. You are the former, which should be disclosed for everybody that's watching this video, you are the former chairman of the Democratic Party.
Twice.
We applaud you for that. What we said in truth. What you wish to accuse us of, you may wish to accuse us of, but it is baloney.
Boy.
I am sick and tired of people pulling out these pejoratives instead of discussing issues, okay? And this voter suppression, racism, all this kind of stuff that comes from the Democrat Party is getting nobody anywhere, all right? You're right. We want to suppress every single illegal vote out there. That's exactly the point, and that's what all of us here should be working towards. But that's what integrity is all about. I just don't understand what the issue is. I really don't.
Well, we've been hunting for those votes for so long, and we can't seem to find them anymore.
Your party's on record saying that everybody should vote, including illegals.
No, it
No,
isn't.
Yes, it is.
No, it's not.
Show us the record.
Leaders in your party.
Where's the record?
Leaders in your party.
You said it's on record. Show us the record.
Problem.
Okay.
Leaders in your party have said this.
I'd like to get away from the partisanship and follow up on Richard's comments. I disagree with the way you've identified the problem, and therefore I have no value for your solution because I don't think there is a problem as you defined it. And whether I'm a Democrat or a Green or whatever, I really don't think that this makes any sense.
So because you don't see a problem now, there's no room for improvement?
No, I don't see the way that you have identified the problem. I know that one thing you have been looking at is speeding up the process of counting votes.
It's not the one thing.
I'm saying that's one thing, not one of several things. And F. Ann made it very clear in her statistics that the problem in the slow vote is with the provisional ballots, not the early ballots. And that's a whole other question. So I just don't agree that there's a big problem. I don't agree that visual verification of signatures has anything wrong with it, and that the electronics would be better. And I just don't, the whole thing seems to me to be baloney, to use your term. And we used to have a real nonpartisan commission here, and I think we're getting more partisan, and that's unfortunate. Or multi-partisan commission.
Any other comments?
I guess one thing I would like to ask, and I don't know the answer to this, so there's always a danger in asking the question that you don't know the answer to, but we made a presentation to Brad Nelson. At any point did we represent that we were part of this was a part of this commission, other than you knew we were members?
Because my familiarity with gentlemen, including Mr. Beard and my contact during the 2018 election cycle with Chair Eppheimer, I knew what your individual positions were, not pertaining to the issues in here, but I knew that you were members of the Election Integrity Commission. So, no, you did not present yourselves during the meeting that you had with me that you were proposing to speak for the commission. Does that answer your question?
That's my question, and I can't say how many times we said that. At least 10, 15, and I may be talking per individual meetings. I regret that Mr. Huckleberry may have set you on fire, Mr. Bickel. I've known Chuck for a long time. He's an honorable man. I'm sure he meant well. And again, we didn't say, I'm sure you know that we didn't say, okay, well, here's something for you to sign, distribute. Contrast this with the way the recorder handled it, and she didn't, to my knowledge, there's nothing in writing, but I know she circulated it. At the end of the recorder's meeting, you can verify this. They asked if this was public or private. I said, how do you keep anything a secret? You can't. There's been versions of this were bumping around for months. And I could not have been more forthright in trying to talk about these issues before this group, and was roundly chastised for doing so. But I felt like we needed to have these things. I think my words were, and maybe Bill Beard's words were, these are things that are awkward. These are things we don't like to talk about, but we need to go ahead and have this conversation. And we did. The documents attached to this was the end result of a Republican effort to look at what happened in the 2018 election, put down on paper what we observed. There were some things we observed that we didn't talk about, but I've been very complimentary. I think these guys have been complimentary of the way generally it was handled. It is a different world, in spite of what our differences are here. And Barbara knows how many hours we sat there on infinitum. We ran out. Next time I'm going to sit with Barbara, I'm going to bring tic-tac-toe sheets or something, because it was hours and hours. So they were made with generous, this was made with generous participation by citizens. If you don't like it, sorry, but it is not, Mr. Rogers, what you say it is.
I stand by my statement.
I
You
wouldn't
don't
expect you to
you don't
change.
have to be brilliant to read between the lines of the recommendations that you guys make and the
What, may I
questions
ask?
that you
May
have.
I ask, that's a common statement.
How
would you feel if I said to you, you don't have to be brilliant?
In a nutshell, the bottom line here is we don't have a problem with the elections in Pima County. We may have some problems in Cote County and other words, but I stand by the idea that we probably have the finest run elections in this county of any county in the entire United States.
I agree.
And you said.
We didn't 20 years ago, but we do now.
I don't know about the whole United States, and I don't know about Maricopa County and the rest of them. I know Maricopa County had a lot of problems. This was a cold, hard look at what we were doing here, and there's always room for improvement, even in the way you tie your shoelaces.
Did
Now-
you make your comments to on the procedures manual? That is where a lot of this would belong. There's nothing in the procedures manual that allows, for example, for electronic verification of signatures. If you had comment there, that might have been more appropriate, just I think this would be added.
This is a fine example of government at work. We are citizens. We're trying to produce a document. We produced a document. We presented it to our legislators. I didn't lead the effort for the review on the procedures manual. And unfortunately, because of some things with my family and with a very long-term mentor, I had to be out of town from almost the day the procedures manual draft was finally written until earlier this past month, or late this past month. So somebody else headed that up. And I'm presuming that Mr. White's comments were well received. Don't know myself what he may not have said.
You did not sign on to your document, neither did Karen Sweetie.
No, they weren't a part of the study.
But you made a point of saying you ran it by both of them.
Karen Schutte received a late copy of it. Benny White received some early copies of it. He chose not to participate.
And I don't think they were included in his comments, but let's move on.
Well, wait a minute, what inference is that?
I don't believe he took your recommendations and sent them as comments to the procedures manual. But let's move on.
Well, I don't know. I really don't know.
Let's move on.
I would agree with you, the procedures manual needs to have some of these thoughts in it, but maybe there's not the underlying statutes of it, so I don't know.
Any other comments?
If I can go back to, I made a statement about the Democrats and illegals. On March the 8th, 2019, in the House of Representatives, House Democrats overwhelmingly reject motion to condemn illegal voting. There.
No, that's not by voting by illegals, it's not the same as illegal.
So illegal voting.
No, it isn't.
No, I didn't say illegal. I said illegal voting. Please don't put words in my mouth.
You did say, whatever. Let's move on.
Well, I'm wondering what happened since Huckleberry, Mr. Huckleberry instructed all these people to respond to this memo. What happens? Who coalesces that? Is it going to be on the agenda for the Board of Supervisors to discuss? Is it something that you have to do? Because I don't understand all of what else we got. Like, did you write this thing that's called Procedures Review Background document that's in the handout today? So if you could walk through what else was sent to us, given to us this morning, and what happens next, that would be helpful for me to understand maybe how I want to respond.
And I would like to know, maybe that's why you were here today?
He's supposed to be here all the time.
Is he like Dave?
This is easy.
This is a more spirited than normal
It's all right.
meeting.
If I may. As you see, I think in the third paragraph, Mr. Huckleberry has requested a written analysis from me. That is in process. I think you can all appreciate that it needs to go before him, before it comes before this particular organization. And then I will take his guidance once I give him that analysis on what he wants to do.
And I guess the concern that I would have there is because this was presented to Chuck as a Republican Party effort, and it was Chuck's assumptions that the ESC was somehow involved. I would ask if it comes back to you guys as a Republican Party effort, since you've provided us with the Republican Party effort, you provide us with the response as well. Because there's certainly no obligation on Chuck's part to give it to this commission.
We have a refined list. If you read that, he's asked for a list of what it is we want. We tried to take this document and distill it into something that was shorter, more brief, and perhaps to the point. As we were doing this, Levoy commented somebody in history. It was Levoy that said, if I had more time, I would have made it shorter, but maybe it's Mark Twain. It's been a daunting task, because when you know too much, sometimes it's hard to express it in few words. So that process is ongoing. We were at it last night at 10 o'clock. We will be producing something for our chairman to look at. And when we have something that he's agreeable to, and he is representation in that process as EIC members. We happen to be EIC members, but there's no representation that way. So there we are, and hopefully that answers your questions as to where it's going.
I would ask, as you continue to develop this process as an effort of the Republican Party, that if you want the issues to be discussed by this commission, rather than a report that may or may not address issues that we would like to discuss, or may not address issues that can be, or there's a desire to be discussed by the body as a whole, that you present them when Michael suggests or solicits items for the agenda, that rather than put an item on the agenda, like this report, that has numerous agenda items or numerous subjects within it that could be individual agenda items for discussion, I would rather see it presented as individual agenda items, because there are several topics in here that could be discussed at length as an individual agenda item. And for the purposes of this commission, I would prefer to see them show up as individual items on the agenda. Therefore, nobody has the opportunity to come back and say, well, you know, you didn't discuss item 6. Well, we simply ran out of time. You know, I would like them to be recommendations for discussion as individual agenda items.
Not a problem.
Okay.
We'll provide a copy of what we have had, what's been approved by the group that wrote it, and agreed to be circulated to you as soon as we have it. We'll actually give it to Dale, and he can circulate it amongst you. We've made no attempt to hide anything. I might add.
And that's, I mean,
that's-
I think that's wonderful, but that's not what I'm asking
And,
for. I don't want the commission to parse the report. I want you guys to parse the report and put it on the agenda.
Okay, so you want us to pick the items, or would you like to pick the items?
It's your report, you pick the items.
Because I will be happy to encourage our guys here as we get together to run by with you what it is that we're going to talk about, and for your approval prior to putting it on the agenda.
Send it to Michael.
You got it?
Michael will send it to me. That's the way the
There
system
you
is
go.
designed.
Okay.
Richard?
The bottom of Mr. Huckleberry's memo, his last paragraph says, I have also invited our EIC to provide any suggestions they have for legislative amendments to our current election process. So is that a charge to us that we need to actively start looking at what amendments we think need to be made to the law?
I think that's a general invitation to make suggestions. What we did not know, I don't know if you guys knew this, we've learned that there's a legislative calendar process for the Board of Supervisors. It's come sometime in, when do you start? October, it's in October, but you start the process probably in August or something like that.
Start submitting, April for basically a due date in October, I can't remember the
Okay,
specific.
so you go through a process of collecting ideas and stuff, and then they get put in some format, and then the board votes on them, and they get submitted to some place. Where do they go?
I'm not sure what the Board of Supervisors process is.
Okay.
They vote on their legislative agenda at their meeting. And it's a part of, if you are geeky, you can dissect the Board of Supervisors' agenda and find out exactly what their legislative agenda is. And all the historical documentation is there. If you want to go back, I know at least in 2008, because I've gone back far enough in their minutes to look for the creation of this commission, but what they've looked at in previous legislative agendas, and it's up to them to decide what they want to bother the legislature about in any given year.
Who do they submit it to?
Board, the clerk of the board.
I mean, who do they submit it to? I mean.
No, it's their legislative agenda.
Right.
Mike Rassi is the county's lobbyist.
Gotcha.
That's who would lobby
That's
the legislative agenda on behalf of the Board Board of Supervisors.
Okay, now that you've talked about that process, let me reiterate my question. It says, I have invited REIC to provide any suggestions. Who did this invitation go to? Because we're not on the distribution list, only through the courtesy of Brad's office. Did we get a copy to see this memo? And
I haven't received an invitation.
so what's up with that? I don't know.
More of a staffing issue than anything. There's no hidden agenda behind it. I think that was a generic statement, knowing that this would eventually reach you.
No,
If you would
what-
like a formal invitation from the county administrator, I can see if I can
Yeah,
provide you.
Well, it's my understanding that we're advisory to the Board of Supervisors, so if the county manager is looking for us to act in a certain way, it would be nice to have that direction, because right now they're saying, well, it's a nice general thing, it appears on every document, that's what I'm hearing. If you're saying it's a generic statement, well, if it's a generic statement, one, why is it here? And two, it sounds like we're being asked, we're being given a charge here that, given the process that we're looking at next October to start, or next April, isn't that the month you picked that it starts in? To start saying, we would like to see
Yes, exactly.
specific legal changes.
We ought to be looking at that as a regular part of our process, now we know it exists.
And I guess probably the most nonpartisan or bipartisan or multipartisan word used on this commission is perception. And certainly the perception reading this memo is that Chuck has sent an invitation to the EIC.
Yeah, again, I wouldn't read too far into it. This is not a breach of protocol. He's not, you're commissioned by the Board of Supervisors. If you wish to submit as the EIC direct to them, I don't think he's trying to tell you you have to go through him or any other possibility of reading into this.
No.
It was simply an invitation that we have a legislative agenda cycle.
But the point I'm making, John, is we tend to be overly literal at times.
Sure.
And it says, I have also invited our EIC. As the chair of this commission, I haven't received that invitation. I don't know if any of the individual members have received that invitation. If there's a perception that somewhere we're reading this memo and we should consider that an invitation, then it shouldn't have said, I have also invited, because he hasn't.
No.
One of the things that we did right at this one out, we did not know who we went to. That was one of the reasons why we went ahead and we made sure Mike had a copy and sent it out to everybody just to make sure everybody had a copy. We didn't know where it went. We had no idea. It was blind copy everybody.
Oh, I have no problem if you got your report. I have more problems with Chuck's memo than I do with your report.
It's reported in the local news, the TV stations reported on it, so it did make a wider presence in the community than just in a website.
Richard?
Well, I'm wondering if we need, as a commission, to state that, to disavow that this is part of the Elections Commission, Integrity Commission, because he says, he starts off as RE. It says, Pima County Election Procedures Review conducted by Republican members of the Pima County Elections Integrity Commission. So clearly he's thinking that you guys were acting as a subcommittee of this group.
No, I
That's
don't
what-
think so. No, I wouldn't.
That's
You
how
have
I
a
read
lawyer
it.
attack sitting next to you, but I don't think that's the case.
I think Brian's already said you're going to send them memo too, so I think Brian's already addressed that.
I'll send him a memo.
Okay.
And by the way, that's not the way I read it out, but I was a part of that, so.
And basically, the
They've
tentative
already
memo
read it.
is, you met with Republican members of the Election Integrity Commission and you apparently assumed. And
Yeah.
this was in no way a product of this commission.
And that's fine. I have no problem with that. In fact, it's a good thing to clarify.
Does he have a standing committee, invitation to come?
Who,
Mr.
Chuck?
Huckleberry? Yeah.
Maybe
Maybe
he
he
needs
needs
to
to
know
know
where
where
he
he
is.
There.
For a reason.
No, there is,
I actually came with this agenda item, but it just happened to work out.
when I started on this commission, we had an attorney. The county had an attorney who filled your role as a regular member, and pretty much came all the time, and she got promoted, demoted, moved, quit, retired, something. And Nicole Pfeiffer assumed that role for a period of time, and something happened to her, and
I became his boss. That's what happened.
so, and your role within the county is assistant deputy or deputy?
Assistant county administrator.
Assistant county administrator, you're one of
One of four.
four, okay.
This is 4.
No, I know of 3. I didn't realize that, which is fine, but he has a
We have the right
role
guy
as
here.
commission.
We have the right guy here to take.
I'm going to relay all of this to Chuck, and I'll tell him to anticipate something coming from your office.
My office, hell, my office is right.
As is mine.
Okay, any other discussion on this agenda item? John, future agenda items.
I've got a couple of things here. We talked about it, Brad said he would briefly give us a brief on the 249 precincts in Pima County, their makeup, how they come about, and so on and so forth. This is at the next meeting, is that correct?
I'm not going to be here, but that's what you wish
Well, let's
to
do
have.
it the following meeting. I'd like to hear it from you.
October the 18th, I know that's a subject for discussion going forward, but I am going to be deeply involved in some mandatory training.
Okay?
And I suggest that you read the part of the state statutes that says what the criteria are for precinct information.
We will. And then a second item as to whenever you feel appropriate. We were going to talk about the dollars involved in having these elections and some kind of a historical perspective. I guess I wouldn't be a Republican if I wasn't concerned about how much things cost. Votes should be, no vote is too inexpensive, or too expensive, I guess is the right word, expensive. But we need to know how that works. I say we need to know, we should understand it a little better, and if we can, be able to reach out to our legislators and such.
Getting off the topic.
I beg your pardon?
The topic is future agenda items. The future agenda
Well,
item
that's
is
why,
those numbers.
that's the item, so whenever you feel comfortable for that.
Will a copy of the procedures manual as presented to the Attorney General be available
I assume it'll be on
after
the website.
October 1st?
I assume so. The current version, the draft version is there. I would assume they would send the corrected version.
It says yes.
Would you let us know how many, if any, of your comments may find a cut?
I'll also check on Benny's.
Keep procedures manual on using.
Currently, I have how precincts are established, but that's gonna be moved to November, since Brad's not gonna be available next time. Reimbursement of PPE, I guess that's gonna go to November also.
I can give you the data, because you asked for the historic data, so whether you guys want to.
I don't have a problem discussing the cost of elections with Brad not here.
Okay.
And that's,
So I'll have that, and I've got
can
what does
you-
elections
Would
in
be my
January look
preference,
like?
Mr. Chairman, if you did present it, so, because there'll be more questions and then maybe the answers.
Okay, then we'll postpone the cost until
Until
Brad's back.
November? Okay.
Well, no, until Brad's back.
If I come back.
Then I have, what does elections integrity look like for Levoy, since that was tabled this time around? EI,
Isaac.
for Mr. Pothier, and then the procedures manuals. That's what I currently have.
I'd like to put, just for sake of discussion, Dr. Ryan's op-ed this morning.
It's good,
I didn't see it.
very good.
Yeah. It has to do with the SAFE bill, whatever, and SAFE is an acronym. But
Michael, would you get a copy and send it all to us, because I don't
Would
want to.
somebody brief those of
Somebody-
us who don't
somebody
know
has it,
what
send
we're
me a
talking
link.
about?
Dr. Ryan's the
Okay.
former
Okay.
chair of this commission. He is a political scientist that looks at,
Right,
he was
and his op-ed said,
basically encouraging, the House has passed a bill, the Senate is holding it, and it has to do with election security. But he is a former member of this commission, and I don't know whether it said that in a little snippet at the end of the article or not. I don't believe it did, but he's very, his hot button was the audits after the election actually occurred. And it was a persistent subject.
Till we did the RO.
Yeah.
We even did one.
So we did a trial balloon, and it flowed very well. But I would like to discuss, and I'll try and get a copy of that piece of legislation.
I'll never get that day back.
Okay, any other future agenda items?
Presidential preference again.
Presidential preference again?
Just updates
Just
on what's
update
going
on the
on.
plans, yeah.
Okay.
That should be until we've had it, March.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sure the Secretary of State will have ideas as to how we're gonna make this happen. Okay, future meeting dates.
So, November 15th, will the election interfere with you being able to participate?
No. Election day is November the 5th, if my memory serves me correctly.
Yeah.
Mhm.
We are not a countywide election. We have some medium to small school districts and a fire district election, which is all mail. I would imagine it may not be canvassed by that particular date by the respective jurisdictions, but we should be counting.
Are there any school bond issues?
Pardon me?
Any school bond issues?
No bond issues, but overrides.
Okay.
You guys don't participate at all in the city election process, right? Is that correct?
Only if there's an existing IGA. For example, sometimes if we are having a regularly scheduled anyway, the city will put something on our ballot, but save for that experience, they are standalone.
Do they use the county's equipment?
No, they have all of their own stuff.
All, it's the same ones, I thought. I was gonna ask them about that.
It's the same.
It's a real waste
It's the same.
of money.
It's
But,
not.
as an agenda item.
So October 18th is the meeting date. You had a problem with that?
I'm going to be in town, but I'm in some mandatory training that I cannot get out of.
So do we want to change the date or do about that?
No, but it's convenient for everybody else. I plan around the 3rd of, my schedule revolves around this meeting. Moving it is.
Yeah, I may not be here on the October the 18th, depending on, I'm in a jury trial. It's, should be all week. It might be done by then, but it might not.
As a future agenda item, can we get David in possibly on October 18th to give us an update on software updates from
He is going to be in Phoenix on the 17th, so let me see what his schedule allows for.
Okay,
But
if he's available, or anybody that can give us a status of the software updates, because we haven't talked about them, and there's apparently some significant updates that are either in the works or imminent.
okay.
I'd like a follow-up on our hot button item today. Since you have to write a report, and I guess he's asked for FN Rodriguez's office to respond, to find out what the responses are.
As I'm sure the folks in this committee can understand, I am only going to comment on those things that pertain to the elections department.
Golly gee, imagine that.
You're not gonna run for the court?
No.
Okay, December 20th, anybody got a problem with that?
Yeah, let's drop that one.
Got it.
Drop the meeting entirely?
Yes.
I thought you said you've done that basically in the past.
We have.
Yeah, it's just too close to the holiday.
Okay, we'll drop the December meeting, and we're only required to have it.
do we need to make a motion to do that?
I move we drop the December meeting.
Second, discussion? Objections? We will not meet the month of December. January 17th?
That's too far
So
ahead.
far, too far.
That's another year.
That's a year away, right?
First meeting in an election year. Okay. Motion to adjourn?
Motion made.
Objections? We stand adjourned.